Welcome back to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to sunny Los Angeles and speak with Mike Maloney of goldsilver.com. Mike Maloney, welcome to our first ever Saturday edition of the Kaiser Report.
I'm honored, Max.
All right, Mike Maloney, let me ask you this. Ben Bernanke has promised to keep interest rates at near zero for the next 2 years. What will this do to the economy and to the dollar?
You know, I said before that Ben Bernanke is dumber than gold. Gold automatically balances interest rates. It balances currency inflows and outflows, trade imbalances. This was something that didn't take a group of men trying to figure these things out. What we've got is a monetary system that is a Ponzi scheme. It steals wealth from the middle class and transfers that wealth to the government and the banking sector. These people get to ride for free because what they're doing by printing more currency and diluting the currency supply all the time, and this is what zero interest rates will do. It'll expand the currency supply. When they do this, it dilutes the currency supply and causes the purchasing power to go down. People call it inflation. It's the dollar losing purchasing power, and this goes down just because there's more and more and more units of currency out there. So basically, you know, he's on the path of destroying the dollar.
The average lifespan of a fiat currency, I just learned this, is 27 years. So the U.S. dollar, being a fiat currency, has been around for 40 years. It seems like it's overdue to be replaced and bring back something of tangible value like the gold standard. You've been talking about this for quite some time. Talk to us a little bit about how you transition to a gold standard. In other words, you've got a lot of fiat money out there. Do you need to figure out the ratio between fiat money and the available gold and the money supply, for example, in the U.S.? How does that factor into a transition?
Well, you know, when I was writing, this is one of the chapters that was actually cut out of my book. My book was 2.5 years of research and editing, but actually the research was 6 years because it goes back to the beginning of when I got into this, really. And one of the things that I did as an exercise, when I was writing back in 2006 roughly, I went and found what would it take to instill confidence once again in the U.S. dollar if the U.S. dollar was going into a hyperinflation or there was a crisis of confidence. And basically I believe that that would take something like the Bretton Woods system, where the U.S. dollar would be redeemable in gold, but to foreign central banks only. Because believe me, when this current monetary system starts to fall apart, they're going to want to try and run some scam on us again, and only back, they're going to try and back the fewest dollars possible with gold. And so by making foreign central banks only eligible to redeem their gold, that's the way of cheating cheating gold the most, by making the fewest dollars possible redeemable in gold. When I did this, what I did was found out how many dollars are held by foreign central banks, and you just divide it by the ounces of gold that the Treasury claims to own. They may not, all of the gold that the U.S. supposedly has was turned over to the Federal Reserve in 1934, and the Treasury has a bunch of $100,000 gold notes, pieces of paper that say, "I owe you gold," from the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve has all the gold, and the Federal Reserve can't be audited. So what they've done with it over the decades in between, we have no idea, but Alan Greenspan admitted in testimony to Congress in 1996 that the world's central banks were leasing gold to suppress its price, to keep gold's price down. So whether or not the U.S. actually has the gold, that's very questionable. But if they did have all the gold that they said they did, then the price of gold has to rise to about $20,000 per ounce. When I did the exercise, it was $19,837 or something like that per ounce for the Treasury to have enough gold to cover every dollar that foreign central banks are holding. Now, if currencies were to fail and you were just to replace all of the dollars out there with gold, it requires a price around $203,000 per ounce if you were going to just replace all of the currency with gold. I'm not saying that these are these are prices that gold is going to, but gold is still extremely undervalued at this point. And I think that Ben Bernanke's policies basically say that the dollar is doomed. He's willing to sacrifice the dollar to save the economy, but when he sacrifices the dollar, ultimately it's going to ruin the economy. It's a short-term fix. It's a Band-Aid it's a Band-Aid that's going to leak.
Okay, so to come up with a price of gold that would satisfy the outstanding claims in fiat currency, you're using the dollars held by foreign banks to come up with your ratio of how that would play out. Others are looking at the U.S. money supply. They look at M1 or M2 as that number is reported, and they come up with similar numbers, anywhere between $5,000 to $15,000 per ounce. Now, is there? It may seem a bit technical, but is there any? How would you contrast these two methodologies of using as your? I guess it would be your numerator, either the cash held in foreign banks, or let's say the M2 money supply. Does it matter at all, or would you make a contrast these two?
Well, when I wrote my book, in my book I've got some graphs that are generated from information from the Treasury and the Federal Reserve. And what it shows is that the base money in the country, the money that's created by the Federal Reserve and the Treasury in sort of a hocus-pocus scam that they've got going, they ramped that up for World War I. And so there were more claim checks on gold than gold that existed. Our currency used to be a claim check on gold. And then we go along and there's bank runs in the 30s, and then they allow the dollar to float, and the dollar's value sank until gold's price rose from $20 to $35 an ounce. And in doing so, there was enough gold at the Treasury to once again back every dollar ever printed from George Washington to Roosevelt. Then we printed a bunch more claim checks on gold. And by 1971, there were too many claim checks out there and not enough gold. Charles de Gaulle had been asking for gold for several years, the president of France, and gold was flowing out of the Treasury, and Nixon had to take us off of gold. He ended the Bretton Woods system. And once again, the will of the public and the free markets bid the price of gold up until for a year, there was more, the value of the gold at the Treasury was greater than the value of all the dollars ever printed, and it also covered outstanding revolving credit, unpaid credit card balances. The credit cards are replacing cash in circulation. And for that same thing to happen today, for history to repeat, and the same thing that happened in 1934 and in 1980, it requires $15,000 to $20,000 per ounce gold. When I wrote my book, it was only $6,000 that it required. But Ben Bernanke created all of this excess base money. In just the past 2.5 years, base money has gone from $825 billion to just a breath away from $3 trillion. So we've created more paper currency, basically, in the last 3 years, 4 times more than in the past 200 years. And if gold rises to meet that, again, like it did in 1934 and in 1980, it's $15,000 to $20,000 per ounce gold.
Right, so going back to 1980, when gold was $800 an ounce, the ratio of coverage to paper claims to gold was roughly 1-to-1. Right now, it's about 15% coverage.
Yeah, it was over 1-to-1 for a while. It was actually up at about 1.2 to 1. So there was more, the value of the gold at the Treasury exceeded the value of all of the currency created. But right now it's about 12%, and if you add outstanding revolving credit, because credit cards are replacing cash in circulation. And when I charge something on a credit card, I expand the currency supply of the planet, and the merchant that I am paying, his checking account can't tell the difference between a dollar I created or a dollar that the Federal Reserve created. And that dollar circulates until somebody saves it up and pays down credit card debt. When you take this into account, the currency that the public is creating, outstanding revolving credit, then we're at about 8% coverage. So the gold has to rise tremendously to cover all of these all of this excess currency.
I've asked a couple of people this. Maybe you know the answer. You talked about credit cards and how that factors into this money supply number. How does, do you know, how do food stamps fit into this? Because it seems like food stamps are part of a black market, you know, that nobody really talks about the food stamps out there. The fact you've got 40 or 50 million people in America using food stamps, how does that factor into the growth of money supply?
Well, you got me there, Max. This is something I never thought of even studying, but I'm going to now because that is important. It's another form of counterfeit money that they're just counterfeit currency that they're just creating out of thin air.
I want to ask you one last question. Christine Lagarde, the new IMF chief, she was speaking to the IMF at Jackson Hole, the Jackson Hole gathering with Ben Bernanke and other central bankers. And one of her big points there was that policymakers have to do everything they possibly can to keep house prices from falling further. What are your thoughts on this point?
My thoughts are they won't let the free markets work. Real estate got into a bubble because of policymakers trying to manipulate things. They were trying to keep the stock markets from seeking equilibrium and going back to realistic PE ratios and dividend yields. They pushed it into a bubble. The bubble popped. Nobody likes a recession, so the government comes in to save us, and they try and push the stock market back up by lowering interest rates and accidentally create a housing bubble. They're going to create some other bubble regardless of what actions they take. We have a monetary system that is at fault for this. We are using a Ponzi scheme monetary system that isn't a free market monetary system. If we allowed the free market to once again select what money was and what the price of money is, the price of money is interest rates. The interest rates would be different, and the free markets always select gold and silver. You know, I don't care about gold and silver that much. I don't want to try and come back to some gold standard. In fact, I wrote an article once called Gold Standards Suck. A gold standard is a national currency that's supposedly backed by gold. And it just opens the window for all this, these scams to be run on us again. If you just used gold, gold is what the free market selects. Gold and silver are the two forms of money that the free market selects.
Right, gold itself is not a panacea. You still have the possibility of these multi-leveled schemes